illegal efforts to force the city, they entered into contracts to provide emergency housing for the homeless. So this was the impact old media had. It moved people. Old media was read by a lot of people on the subway train. Today I came on the B train, and I saw between 47th Street and, well, I actually took one stop further, I missed my stop, Broadway Lafayette, I saw 6 people reading a newspaper. The subway car was full. That's not good. You're not going to have the impact. It may be it displayed itself in the election, maybe not, I'm not sure. Stuyvesant Town was a big deal, affected a lot of people. Mayor Bloomberg was reelected. Did he pay a price for that? Maybe not getting the vote he wanted, and maybe it had nothing to do with Stuyvesant Town one way or another. But the old media moved people in a way the new media hasn't figured out how to do yet. And somehow we're along the line, we have to figure out how to bring that drama, that presentation, that engagement with your ordinary reader, with your subway rider, your cab driver, your banker, and to find a way to bring it to them. In addition to being a reporter, I'm also an assignment editor of the Post, and I decide on some days what goes in the paper and what doesn't. A lot of these Stuyvesant Town stories, to tell you the truth, the way presented today, wouldn't get into the news pages of the Post. It would take something more ambitious to go down there and to really turn it into a drama on some level. To take the numbers, which are important, and display it with a human face. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort. It takes some talent and skill, and it takes newsprint pages. And we don't have enough of all those things at our disposal now. And that's a problem for us as a society in the long term. So I'll get off my soapbox, I'm sorry. But basically the challenge for our industry is to figure out how to bring the best of old media into a new medium. And we're still really working on that. This hasn't been solved yet. Nobody's come up with that yet.
Add to, Amanda?
Well, I think both of you bring up a good point, but it's all a matter of what your audience is. I mean, for the real deal, you have subscribers who are actually in the business. So, like in our case for Cranes, we kind of have both, I guess. We have the happy medium. You know, we know our readers are real estate executives, are the politicians, but then at the same time, you know, we want to appeal to the mainstream too. Whereas, as Tom was saying, you know, at the Post, you know, we want kind of the stories that would appeal to people on the subway who can pick it up and read it, you know, and understand what's going on. So when you're writing about like pro forma numbers and investments that went wrong and that should have been noticed maybe, you know, way before 2-3 years ago, you know, you won't get, I mean, you would get the attention of people in the industry, but as opposed to, you know, someone kind of just randomly, you know, who's not really in the business, they wouldn't be so interested in it. I mean,
let me just briefly say, just for the record, I mean, we have taken a lot of steps to bring real people into our stories. I mean, I've gone down to Rector Square and talked to people that live in the building when the building went, you know, into foreclosure, while people were sitting around, you know, saying what happened to us. You know, there were people who were tenants and people who were buyers who had literally moved in within months, and then all of a sudden they find out that, you know, the building just went into foreclosure, the sales office is closed, the construction is half done. I've gone to the Sheffield and looked at wires hanging off out of the ceiling. You know, I've gone up to Harlem when the protesters were, you know, in the streets kind of marching in front of 125th Street, where, you know, Kimco had bought the shopping center and was, you know, pushing people out of their stores. I mean, so it's not just about, and also just to be fair, I mean, we're limited in a sense by our audience because a lot of people on the street would really not know that we exist in a real sense. And, you know, the way the web works, you know, a lot of times, you know, a good story just gets picked up and it goes viral and you don't even know, like, who actually wrote it in the first place. Because we've seen stories that we've done get picked up by the mainstream press, literally the same story almost. And it circles around the internet, and by the time the reader reads it, they think the story originated from the mainstream press, as opposed to us. So, you know, that is a fair point. But we're all kind of trying to figure out how to best, you know, approach our audience.
So, Charlie, just in the other panel is just to, we have a few minutes to wrap it up. And I thank you all. It was very, very enlightening and really informative. And it's nice to see all of you on the other side of the table, particularly. Let me, if I can, I want to just ask a couple of questions that would be both for our real estate as well as our journalist students. maybe some process questions, and maybe each of you could take a minute or two just answering it from your own selves, from yourselves or from your publications. It's interesting to me because I've always been amazed when I've been involved in a project that has a story written about it, to see in many cases just how pinpoint accurate you all can be. And I've been maybe fortunate, but I also have learned in my career maybe a little bit of the give and take between the press to make sure that the stories are as accurate as they could be by giving out information that will at least get our side of the story out. I'd like maybe each of you to talk for a second about that give and take, if you can, for just a minute or two, in terms of how you develop sources, how you work with those sources, whether or not you make commitments to protect them. I mean, how does that work exactly? Who would like to start?
Do we want to start?
How we develop sources and the give and take? Well, you know, you develop sources generally by writing a story, and brings you in contact with people, and there's a strategy in reporting. I think it's the most effective strategy for reporting that I know. It's called the second notebook. When you're out covering something, you're talking to people about other things. You know, you're in a room full of people like real estate executives. You're at a crime scene or whatever it might be. You're looking for another story where you're there. You're making contacts. You write a story. You do a good job of it. Perhaps you earn some credibility with somebody who will call you. And how you develop and work with sources from then on, you know, it's a relationship you develop very often, and you have to be careful, especially writing about an industry like this. We're really dependent on people in the industry and government to kind of give you information. You have to be careful that you don't get to the point where you feel like you're protecting people or skewing a story. And I see that potential here more than other things that I've covered in the past. In the past, I used to be a real dirtbag about, you know, people sometimes go in there and just really burn the house down. I can't do, and I wouldn't do it. I would be fair and honest, and it would be right. That's the bottom line. I felt okay with it because it was right. But you can't really do that here because you need people to talk to you. So it's a delicate dance that you have, and you know, you have to be very careful that you don't skew and that you don't show favoritism, because there's a real temptation to do that, because we depend on people for this information. It's our livelihood. And I'll just quote Jimmy Breslin really quickly, but he once said, "Reporters today are beneath taking a bribe." His insinuation was that in the old days, you would pay somebody a case of scotch or something, get something in the paper, or a couple $100s. And I remember a couple of those characters from when I started out. And today, we don't write things because we're afraid of burning sources. Or we do write things that may be unfair, or that because we're trying to cuddle up to people, cozy up to people. And that's a problem.
Thank you.
I like to, before I approach a story, just kind of do a lot of background research and talk to people that are kind of on the edges of a story first to get their perspective. Maybe somebody who is kind of not necessarily in the middle of the story or on top of the story, but kind of was around the story, and get someone that's got a little bit more perspective on what actually happened, and then kind of try to, you know, find out, you know, am I asking the right question? Am I talking to the right people? And then kind of, you know, get my ducks in a row before I kind of, you know, talk to a main source. I mean, we do a lot of profiles. We do profiles every month on various players around the industry, and, you know, we try to, you know, get as much background information on people that were involved in various deals, talk to brokers, talk to lawyers, talk to lenders, talk to competitors, you know, talk to people who, you know, may have some perspective that you didn't really think of off the top, and then, you know, people, they read our stories and they come back to us and say, you know, it's an interesting story, you know, here's what's happening in my, you know, neck of the woods, for example. So we get a lot of people that kind of, you know, come back at us that way as well.
Charles?
I agree with what these other guys have said, that, you know, the first thing you want to do, or at least that I want to do, is I want to know all the answers to the questions before I ask the principals, so I can gauge whether they're being truthful or not, to the best of my ability. And I'll give you an illustration with Starrett City, where I was talking to one of the people involved with the buyers, and he would tell me in confidence certain information. And because it was in confidence, I could use the information, but I couldn't use his name. And so he said, you know, that this person, Bistrisser, was going to buy it, and that it was going to be through this particular company, and these were his partners. Then subsequently, I sat down with the buyer in a boardroom, and this individual was sitting next to him. And, you know, it came down to it, and I said, well, so and such a company is going to buy it. And the guy said, no, that's not true. Where did you hear that? And then I said, well, Lev Leviev is one of your partners. No, that's not true either. Where did you hear that? I don't know where people get that news. And I'm looking right at the guy that's telling me about it. Now, this guy didn't measure up as a good source. And so I've always discounted what he told, whatever he would tell me. And I think it's an important lesson for anyone that what I, as a very, very lapsed Catholic, what I usually tell people is I make a distinction between sins of omission and sins of commission. And if you fail to tell me something because I didn't ask the right question, that's on me. A sin of omission. But a sin of commission, where you actually lie to me, is a mortal sin, and somehow, some way, it will come back at you.
Not that you would write that, though, Charlie, right?
In a fair and even-handed manner.
Exactly. Amanda?
Well, I agree with all these guys, and I love your story because it's true. I mean, I guess one of the biggest challenges is we don't really know who's telling the truth, and you know, a lot of people lie to us. So we have to have a filter, and one of the ways of having a filter is talking to as many people as we can to make sure that we have the facts. So I guess the only takeaway I could say is, you know, all we ask is that you tell us the truth as much as you can to your knowledge, and you know, we'll do our job as best as we can.
It is okay not to say anything at all, though, right? From
Not
time to
really.
time. Yeah, it is. Elliot?
Yeah, I guess the only thing I'd add is that, you know, I think people do, when they talk to reporters, initially are generally reticent to say anything to a stranger, especially someone who might just put it in print. So, you know, the things to do is just kind of establish credibility and come with a set of, or some knowledge in hand about whatever you're talking about. And, you know, for people who are, I think generally, especially if a story is being written about someone, it's always best to talk off the record. I mean, it's a self-serving statement, but I think it's generally true. Otherwise, you know, a reporter will write something with potentially just one-sided facts, you know, which aren't always right.
Let me ask a question just as a follow-up to that. You guys talked about blogs before, and I know you all have blogs as part of your publications, or you think you're running things continually. But there are a lot of blogs that are out to promote a particular interest, whether it's to oppose a project or to promote whatever their interest may be. How do you distill it? I mean, you know, my experience in dealing with some blogs over the years was that they would just throw anything out there, and if enough people blogged about it, it somehow ended up in one of the mainstream, you know, papers. And once it was in the mainstream paper, it got blogged all over again as having journalistic integrity. What responsibility do you take in that?
Well, I mean, yeah, there are different types of blogs, and I think you have to treat it like you would treat either a news media, a credible news media, or just a tip. If you look at the Real Deal Cranes, you can look at that and you know with certainty that that's been given the same sort of scrutiny that it would be given in you know, a print publication, and you should credit them when you lift stuff, unless you significantly advance it. The other thing is, the other stuff you just use as a tip, basically. It's worth looking at, and you go out there and look at it and find out if it holds up. If it's true, you do the reporting on it. But there is a real problem with the blogging world in that a lot of stuff gets put out there, and to the general public, it looks like, it smells like, and it feels like news, and that's the way they take it, and it's not necessarily so.
Yeah, I mean, we run into this a lot because, you know, a lot of what goes on in the new media is that, for example, depending on how high you are, I'm not an expert in terms of how stuff gets on the top of Google, but you know, a lot of times a story will go out, we'll write it, it'll get picked up by one of the mainstream press or whatever, and then it'll get picked up by a million other people who never did any checking of the original story or even know where the original story came from. And certain papers will show up at the top of a Google search, and nobody will really know where it initially came from. And then it becomes fact because people see it out there on the internet and they think, oh, well, and they never bother to make a second phone call on it. There was an item yesterday, I think, in Curbed, or maybe the day before, the inflatable rat is now in front of the Apthorpe. We got someone sent us the same tip, but I'm like, well, big deal. There's a rat in front of the Apthorpe. There's a rat in front of a lot of buildings. But, is somebody going to make some calls to find out, well, is this rat just kind of hanging out in front of the building? Is there something going on inside the building to get the rat here? Or is the rat really looking at the building across the street? I mean, a lot of times the blogs, they take stuff in bits and pieces, don't really check it out, because that's kind of part of the whole kind of angle of the blog, is they're kind of a little snippy, a little snide, and they put bits and pieces out there in a gossipy way, and sometimes that makes it more interesting, but it doesn't necessarily serve the reader, because it takes, sometimes things get taken out of context. We try as best as possible to, act like a traditional publication, checking, double checking, and before we put something out, because we know as soon as something hits. I mean, I remember when I was at Bloomberg in the 90s, when we were just doing multimedia when nobody else was, we saw stocks just bounce all over the world on a headline before the story even came out. So, I mean, things move very fast.
I think you have to treat a lot of that stuff as a tip and then go out and verify, and you're only going to hurt yourself if you take it as gospel and run with it. Put it in without calling anyone to confirm and try and check it out. And I think it undermines your credibility. I mean, I think we all, when we write a story, we want to be authoritative. By the same token, when we do make a mistake, sometimes it's inadvertent. And in the interest of full disclosure, I had a story about Stuyvesant Town the other day, and I made a mistake in it of identifying Black Stone as the person that was negotiating with Tishman Speyer on behalf of the New York Fed, where Jerry Speyer served as chairman. And it was actually BlackRock. I can't explain my loss of hearing, but when I asked, so is it like old Home Week, negotiating with the, I thought I heard BlackRock, but it was, or I thought I heard Blackstone, but it's BlackRock. My bad.
Amanda?
Like everyone else, I mean, I read blogs like Curbed, but, I never really take it as a fact, and I kind of view it as, you can't be everywhere all the time, so, it is sort of like your eyes, and, when you see something of interest and you think there's credibility, you would just go and check it out and confirm everything. I mean, we do breaking news on our website too, but everything is usually confirmed, so that's what makes us different from the blogs, and that's about it. Yeah.
Elliot?
Yeah, I mean, we're theoretically the filter, and it's obviously dangerous when things just get picked up on blogs, because it makes good fodder. And I can't, when Coney Island, the Bloomberg folks were first trying to bring in, rezoning there, I can't tell you how many people, I guess people my age who probably were, just on Gothamist or some blog like that, like, oh, I hear Disney's buying that, and they're going to add a casino or something.
It was offered to Disney once, actually, a long time ago. So just last question. One of the interesting things for me here at Schack is the ability to sort of push the envelope in terms of where the future development is going to be going in a lot of different areas. And I guess my question to each of you, and maybe we'll start with you first, Elliot, this time we'll go the other way, is what role do you believe you do and should play? I don't want to just say do play, but that you should play as well in terms of helping to shape where the future is going. I mean, you all cover, in some respects, a very specific industry. You're not limited to it, but you do tend to have that as the mainstream of what you focus on. Do you feel that, for example, pushing the envelope on issues of sustainability, or pushing the envelope on, having developers ready in a sort of a rapid response situation for situations like Haiti or September 11th or things like that, where you have people who are ready to move quickly and affect sort of the social fabric of what developers do. I mean, do you see yourself in playing any role in that, or do you see yourself just simply as, reporting on what's going on currently?
I guess personally, I would say I don't, more than anything, I'm just, kind of pushing for rationality, and at least right now, it depends on the area. It's there in some form or it's not. In terms of things like sustainability or really kind of going on a crusade about an issue that's not at the forefront. That's not at least something that I personally push, not to say the press shouldn't. But
Amanda?
Personally, I guess I feel the same way, but I do recognize that when I do write a story and it's published in Cranes, like there is some, there's something about a story being in print and people reading about it and thinking, oh, hey, maybe I should start paying attention, but not so much because I wrote it or I influenced it in some way or shape or form.
Yeah. Charles?
I always feel a little bit ambivalent because, we all want to have impact, right? Otherwise, what are you wasting your time for? You're not poets or any. We're not poets. But on the other hand, I always feel a little awkward when something, you move markets. It's like, well, why are they listening to me? That's just my personal ambivalence with everything.
I think the only real role that is really kind of vital is creating more transparency. I mean, I think that one of the things that concerns me is when I hear people kind of saying something that they think is the truth or they think is what everybody else kind of agrees upon, and it really, they don't really have the facts in front of them to make a decision. I've talked to, for example, a lot of condo buyers who got, burned in bad buildings, for example. And you ask them, well, what did you know about this building before you bought it? Well, did you know that this was going on, that was going on? Did you do any homework? Did your lawyer do anything for you? And they were like, I thought, everything was fine. And, when the information was out there, maybe if some, because frankly, I think a lot of, individual investors were just as to blame as to what happened as anybody else, because it was incumbent upon them. If I'm, spending $10 million on an apartment, I'm not going to rely on some, $500 an hour or whatever, attorney to do my work for me. I want to kind of like get a sense as to what kind of risk I'm putting my individual finances at, and just do some, basic legwork and, take some responsibility for your own finances.
So when you run across those people, just send them to my school, okay? Tom?
Well, a lot of us write about this stuff because we care about it. There's got to be a reason why we have jobs that don't pay us enough to live in New York, the city we care about most. And to think that I have impact on some things is rewarding sometimes. We care about things. I have opinions. I feel outraged by stuff just like anybody else. And in journalism, they teach you to, and I didn't go to journalism school, but they do teach you to be objective, which I think is a bunch of baloney, because I don't think you can realistically be objective. In anthropology, which I did go to school for, they teach you to be aware of your bias, to understand it, to embrace it, and then to be fair. So when I go into a story, I know how I feel about something. I might not like this development or this project, but I make it my business to be fair about how I cover it and to be responsible about it. So that's important. But there is a rewarding sense of affecting change. At the World Trade Center, the stories we did changed the project. And it's a better project if it ever gets built. It's a better project on paper.
It's a better idea.
So it feels good, so we do I think we do have a sense of gratification of seeing something come out better as a result of what we've done.
So we have to wrap up, but any final comments or thoughts that you all have? You're all terrific. I thank you. But any final thoughts from anyone?
Let's hope we're still around in a year.
Okay. Well, can I have a big round of applause? Thank you.